Hello, this video will give you an overview of options for student growth in 2014-15 in grades 4 through 8, and then ask for your feedback at the end with a brief survey. So let's start by talking about the fact that next year, because of our transition to the Common Core, 2014-15 will in effect be a gap year for SGP. Now, why is that? So this spring, as I'm sure you all know, we're giving both the CSTs and Smarter Balanced. It's the last year of CSTs, it's the first year of Smarter Balanced, and because the new Smarter Balanced test is being pitched as a field test, there's no data available. So we will give the assessment, but we won't be able to get back the sort of detailed student achievement data that we are used to getting, which in effect means that next year we won't be able to create SGPs because we don't have this sort of prior assessment data to use as a baseline, which in turn means that the first year that we'll be able to create SGPs based off of SBAC won't really be until 2015-16. So the question becomes, how should we measure student growth in 4th through 8th grade next year? Now, why is it only 4th through 8th grade? So for next year, the strategy for student growth is as follows. In K3, we'll be giving STAR Enterprise, which is an adaptive assessment in 2 subjects, reading and math. It's aligned to the Common Core, and it can be used to progress monitor as well over the course of the year. And it's the same SGP model that we've used in the past for CSTs and that we'll use going forward for Smarter Balanced. In 9th through 11th grade, we'll be giving ACT Aspire. This is a new assessment made by ACT, which is also administered either on a laptop or you can give a version that is paper pencil. There are up to 5 subjects: reading, writing, English, math, and science. They're each about an hour. And we would give it in the fall and the spring and look at growth over the course of the year. It's aligned to the Common Core as well as ACT's internal college readiness benchmarks, starting as early as 3rd grade. And again, it's the same SGP model as the one that we have used in the past for CSTs and that we'll use going forward for Smarter Balanced. So that leaves 4th through 8th grade. Now, again, because it's that gap year for 4th through 8th, we've got 2 options. So option 1 is to effectively have teachers reuse the SGP that they get from this spring CSTs. So next year, if your students were tested this spring, you would reuse your individual SGP from the 2013-14 CSTs. If next year you were untested, so if in this spring you are going to take the school-wide SGP for whatever reason, maybe you are an electives teacher, maybe you were part of a subject that was a CST opt-out, you would reuse the school-wide SGP next year. And if you're a new teacher next year, you would actually have to get some sort of within-year growth measure. So that means that we would either have to use internal benchmarks or we would still give something like STAR or ACT for any new teacher. And that's because we believe both that your effectiveness scores should be based off of the actual impact that you're having on student learning, and if you're new, then that should be based off of the work that you're doing next year. And we also aren't able to remove student growth from the pie. Option 2 for next year is to effectively expand STAR and ACT Aspire to every grade level. So what would that look like? At all elementary campuses, so a K5, a K6, a K8, every grade level would administer STAR to all students. So that would be math and reading for all students. All secondary campuses, so if you're at a 612, a 912, or a 68, you would administer ACT Aspire in every grade level. And so that would be some combination of those 5 assessments that are over here on the right, and basically there would be alignment in this model across schools. So everyone in the school would either be giving STAR or ACT. Alright, so there are obviously pros and cons to both of these options, right? So let's look at the pros first for option number 1, which would be effectively reusing the SGPs from this year, next year. Obviously less testing. So we're already doing Smarter Balance, we have these new internal benchmarks, and we wouldn't have to give any other assessments on top of those for SGP. The cons of this, though, the SGP next year wouldn't be tied to within-year data or a Common Core aligned assessment. So we would be reusing the SGPs from CSTs, which are aligned to the old standards, as opposed to moving forward with our full transition to the Common Core. On top of that, we may worry that the CST scores from this spring may be a little bit lower than they've been in the past, given that there's been this shift towards the Common Core this year. Maybe people haven't been as focused on the standards as they may have been in the past, and as a result, we may see lower scores. On top of that, there's this other issue with new teachers where we wouldn't be able to give them the SGPs from this year because they weren't with Aspire this year. And so next year we would want their effectiveness scores to be based off the actual teaching they're doing that year. And so it would either be some sort of internal benchmark perhaps, or maybe they would have to give STAR or ACT Aspire anyway, and so there'd be this new system where the veteran teachers were sort of using one measure for SGP and the new teachers were using something else. The pros for option 2, which are expanding STAR and ACT for everyone, are sort of the reverse of that. So we would have a sort of current year student growth measure based off the Common Core standards, based off an assessment that actually tested those standards next year, and there wouldn't be this othering where new teachers were sort of using one system and veteran teachers were using another. On the other hand, it would mean more testing. It would mean that on top of Smarter Balanced and the new internal benchmarks, we would also be giving STAR and ACT in the fall and spring. And then also we need to acknowledge that ACT Aspire is a new assessment to us, Aspire, and as a result we may need to look at the SGP cut points next year and see sort of how the distributions look relative to the SGP sample that we're looking at within ACT itself. So it may be a different set of cut points that we've used in the past, and we would have to adjust those once we actually saw the data next year. All right, so there are obviously some other implications here, especially as we look ahead to 2015-16. We've got a picture of a dandelion up here in the corner. That's just to show that I know that we're getting down in the weeds, but I think it's important to really think about this stuff as we make decisions for this year and for next year. So under option 1, again, which would be to reuse the SGPs from this year, next year, there are two things to sort of think about. The first thing is that new teachers would have to use some sort of within-year measure anyway. So it could be benchmarks, it could be STAR, it could be ACT, it could be something else. And why is this? It's because effectiveness rating should really be based on the impact that you're having at your school, not something that has happened in the past before you got there, especially when all of this is tied to salary. So we have these new salary floors, and it just doesn't seem right to have people, if you're new, pulling in scores from the past when you weren't even at a school. In 2015-16 as well, so that's in 2 years, 4th through 8th grade teachers would only have one option for SGP, and that would be the spring 2016 Smarter Balanced. Why is that? Because we can't go back more than 2 years for SGP. Remember, you get either the higher of this year or last year, but if we didn't give any tests next year that could give us an SGP, that would mean that we'd only have one option once you got to 2015-16, and that would be Smarter Balanced from that year. For option 2, things to sort of think about. Next year, new teachers would use STAR or ACT for their SGP, and veterans could use either the STAR ACT, or you could reach back and use the spring CSTs from this year, whichever is higher. This is basically the same system that we have now, where new teachers only have 1 year of data, and so that's their only choice for their SGP, whereas veteran teachers, anyone who's been here 2 years, gets to use either this year or last year. The other thing is that in 2015-16, all 4th through 8th grade teachers would have 2 options for SGP. You could use either the STAR ACT scores from next year, 2014-15, or you could use the Smarter Balanced from 2015-16, and you could choose whichever is higher for your overall rating. So another consideration for next year is reducing the weight of SGP overall as part of the pie. On the left here, you'll see a picture of the current pie. Observations are worth about 40%, student growth is worth about 40%, and surveys are worth about 20%. And for next year, we have the option to reduce the weight of student growth overall. This will be for 1 year only for 2014-15, and it's possible with either option 1 or option 2. So the question then becomes, if we were to reduce the weight of student growth, how do we do it? Do we increase the weight of surveys and observations equally? Do we increase just the weight of observations to something around 60%? Do we increase surveys only, making them around 40% of the pie? Or do we increase the weight of just one survey? Student, family, peer, is there sort of one survey that you would want to see have a larger slice of the pie than it sort of currently does? So that's it. Thank you so much for watching. If you're a 4th through 8th grade teacher, please click the link below on your screen that you should see as part of the YouTube video, or go back to the email, and please take the survey and share your thoughts on how we should proceed with student growth for next year. All right, everyone. Thank you.